Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Armijo, the National Director of Legislative Advocacy at Compassion and Choices, and it's an honor to welcome all of you today. First and foremost, I want to express my deep gratitude to each of you, the dedicated volunteers, the passionate supporters, and the tireless advocates who make this work possible. Your commitment to expanding end-of-life options and ensuring compassionate care is really what drives change in our communities across the country. As many of you know, legislative sessions kicked off around January, and we're seeing incredible momentum. To date, 16 states have introduced medical aid and dying legislation. And Compassion and Choices, along with the Compassion and Choices Action Network, is actively working in many of those states to authorize, protect, and improve access. Also, there are currently improvement bills in New Jersey, Washington, Oregon, and Maine. And recently, just a few days ago, Ed from North Carolina let us know that a study bill was introduced, and the folks at Dying Right North Carolina will be assisting on it. Today, you'll hear from several of my colleagues about what's happening in the 2025 legislative session. But before we get started, let me introduce them for you. Nicole Reyes Palma is our Regional Advocacy Director in the Southeast, and Francesca Triest is our New York, New Jersey campaign manager. We also have Nelson Garcia, our federal director, and Jaspreet Chowdhury, who is our senior legislative counsel. We have exciting updates from all of them ahead, and I'm thrilled to begin us today with Delaware, where volunteers, supporters, lawmakers, and field staff have been working for over a decade to help advance this bill. As you might recall, the Delaware legislature passed a medical aid and dying bill last year, only to have it vetoed by the outgoing Governor John Carney in September, which was 3 months after its passage. This session, Representative Eric Morrison and Senator Brian Townsend reintroduced the bill, which now has a record high 18 sponsors, and the backing of Delaware's new governor, Matt Meyer. In January, the bill passed out of the House Health and Human Development Committee, and just 2 days ago, it passed the full House by a vote of 21 to 17. We're confident we have the votes needed in the Senate committee and on the Senate floor, and those are expected to happen in April. Meanwhile, Team Delaware is driving momentum through TV ads, local podcasts, English and Spanish radio, social media, and statewide postcard campaigns. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to all of the advocates and supporters who have worked to advance this legislation. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the loss of a powerful terminally ill advocate, Diane Krause of Millsboro, whose dedication to this cause continues to inspire us. The team is committed to pushing forward, and we will keep you updated on the progress in the Senate. So Fran, I know that the team and its allied partners have been busy in New York. Can you tell us what's going on in the campaign there?
Of course. Thank you, Elizabeth. So some of you who closely follow the New York campaign might remember that we had the votes to pass the bill in the Assembly by the end of the legislative session last year. Unfortunately, because of the elections in November, we did lose a number of our supportive lawmakers, but we've been pretty successful in winning the support of most of the newly elected Democrats, which has inched us closer and closer to the critical number of votes that we need to pass the bill in the Assembly this year. Now, one thing that's kind of different about New York compared to other states is that there is no set procedural way to compel a vote on a piece of legislation. Control of the legislative agenda lies solely in the hands of the Assembly Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader. And both of these leaders have been pretty clear with our team that they won't allow the bills to move forward unless we have enough committed yes votes to pass it. So what we're doing now in the Assembly is working very closely with our bill sponsor and the Assembly Speaker to confirm our vote count, and we're working to schedule a vote on our bill in the Assembly Health Committee. On the Senate side, we are still working to secure those votes that we need to pass the bill, but we are so close. And thanks to our partners at End of Life Choices New York, who recently conducted polling in some of our target Senate districts, we can now take that positive polling and bring it back to those senators who might still be on the fence and hope that it explains to them that without a doubt, their constituents want them to pass this bill.
Fran, you talk about the votes and securing the votes. What are some of the things that the team's doing to really shore those up, to really secure them?
Sure. Well, our volunteers' consistent presence in the hallways of the Capitol is
Mhm.
probably the single most powerful aspect of our campaign, based on feedback given to us directly from lawmakers who see us there every week. We ask our advocates to stand with us in the hallways every week. We also set up a display of posters so that lawmakers are just repeatedly exposed to basic facts about the bill and faces of the terminally ill advocates that we've lost over the course of the campaign. This coming Tuesday, we'll be back there again, and we'll actually specifically be working with dozens of members of the Unitarian Universalist churches from across the state who are going to be joining us to demonstrate in support of the bill. And then the second most impactful thing we do to move the needle is hosting volunteer phone banks every week, where we're calling supporters in key districts to encourage them to call their own lawmakers and urge them to support the bill. This kind of direct contact from concerned constituents is something that lawmakers take very seriously in New York. And
Yeah.
finally, we're also working to encourage more and more statewide and regional organizations to publicly endorse the bill. And this helps lawmakers who are still on the fence understand just how diverse and broad the support for this measure is across the state. And that way it doesn't look like it's all coming from one place, because we know it's not coming from one place. For example, our list currently of regional and statewide organizations who publicly endorse this bill is at 60. And that has
Yeah, I
been,
was going to ask you, could you give
oh
us an example of
oh my
someone
goodness,
off that list of 60?
where to start? So we have the New York Civil Liberties Union, we have the New York State Bar Association, we have the League of Women Voters who have been incredible advocates for this bill. We have the Medical Society of the State of New York. And actually just last week, this is a new and very exciting development after years of work on our team's part. The New York State Psychiatric Association voted at their annual meeting to support the bill.
Wow.
So we've got some real heavy hitters, and we're really proud of our team for the work that they've done over the last 10 years to create and cultivate that list of 60 organizations.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations to all the folks in New York who worked so hard on that. So, Fran,
Yes.
there's a woman over in Maryland. She's the Maryland State Director. Her name is Donna Smith, and she's been leading the efforts there for a long time. And I know that she shared some updates with our team recently about what's happening over in Maryland. Can you share some of that too?
Of course. So in Maryland, Senate Bill 926 and corresponding House Bill 1328 were introduced in the Senate on February 4th by Senator William Smith. We know that the bill had 49 sponsors at the time of filing. And then on March 3rd, the House Health and Government Operations Committee held a hearing. Over 20 advocates testified in support of the measure. It was really a heroic effort and an incredible hearing. And then the following day, the team followed that up with their huge annual lobby day and press conference in Annapolis. And over 80 advocates attended the lobby day. There were 37 different meetings with Senate offices, and the campaign drove in 1,500 calls into target senators' offices. Despite those incredible and heroic efforts of staff and advocates alike, the bill did not receive a hearing in the Senate, which prevented it from moving forward. While the team secured enough votes to pass the bill out of committee, they were ultimately 4 votes short on the Senate floor. So unfortunately, at this point, the Senate president chose not to advance the bill. And traditionally in Maryland, we do not introduce this bill in an election year, meaning that the next opportunity for reintroduction will not be until 2027. In the meantime, however, the Maryland team will launch an impassioned statewide education and outreach campaign to continue to build that momentum for the critical legislation. I'll just end by saying that Donna asked me to pass along a really heartfelt thank you to everyone who's worked tirelessly to push this forward. In her words, we remain committed to ensuring Marylanders have the end-of-life options they deserve.
I believe Donna had a few other words that we chose to take out, but Thank you for those updates. I really appreciate it, Fran. Um, and I know firsthand how hard they've been working in Maryland. I had the pleasure of being there for Lobby Day just a few weeks ago, and those advocates are fierce and they are hardworking and they navigate the halls of those legislative chambers like nobody's business. So again, I really know firsthand the work that's being done in Maryland, and I really appreciate all the efforts that are taking place there. So thanks for those updates. I'm sure Donna appreciated it so well. So I'm gonna move us a little bit west right now, and I'm gonna hand it over to Nicole to talk about Montana and Illinois. And Nicole, I know you cover the Southeast states, but can you share some of the updates that you might have from your colleagues on what's happening in Montana right now?
Yeah, of course, Elizabeth. Thank you. So, medical aid in dying has been a compassionate option in Montana since 2009, thanks to the Montana Supreme Court ruling in Baxter v. Montana. But every year, we face relentless attempts to take this option away through what we call the Physician Imprisonment Act.
Let me just stop you there, Nicole. I know that that's what we call it, but let me just share with people the real name of that bill. It's called a bill for an act entitled an act providing that consent to physician aid in dying is not a defense to a charge of homicide, providing a definition, amending section 45-2-211 MCA, and providing an effective date. So,
Does that work on a poster? I don't.
exactly.
I
So,
think I run out of space on my sticky note just even thinking about it. Well, the Physician Imprisonment Act actually seeks to criminalize this compassionate choice. And so far each year, we have narrowly defeated their attempts. This session just has not been any different. Montana lawmakers are once again coming dangerously close to making their state the first in the nation to take away the right to medical aid in dying, stripping terminally ill residents a choice they've had for 15 years. And this is how they're doing it. On February 7th, the Montana Senate approved SB 136 by a 29-20 vote, sending it to the House Judiciary Committee, which held its first hearing just yesterday. More than 35 brave advocates showed up to passionately defend their rights and share their stories in opposition. And now we're just currently waiting for a vote. I will say, in an interesting twist this year, a bipartisan bill, HB 637, was introduced in February to officially codify medical aid in dying under state law. It is the first bill of its kind since 2011. While the House Judiciary Committee decided not to move forward, we're still really grateful for those 12 legislative sponsors for their leadership in keeping this important conversation in Helena. Also, a shout out to the Republican bill sponsor, Representative Julie Darlin, also who testified against the criminalization bill that I mentioned a little bit earlier. The reality is that polling shows that over 80% of people living in Montana support medical aid in dying, and nearly 90%, and I have to repeat it, 90% oppose the criminalization of doctors who provide this care. Yet some legislators continue to push a relentless national agenda that contradicts the values of its own constituents. There is hope. We will always continue fighting to protect Montanans' rights. I will keep you updated on the next steps. Unlike other states where we're trying to pass legislation, in Montana, we're trying to keep good medicine in practice and not have it stripped away.
thanks, Nicole.
Elizabeth, I'm wondering, I think it's important, this is 15 years in Montana, right? That since Compassionate Choice, well, 16 years actually, since Compassionate Choice has won the case, that brought this possibility in Montana. And we've been fighting this every other year for like the last 2 years. And I think it's important for people to recognize, um, some of the humanity around this. And yesterday, you and I were joined a meeting when you were actually monitoring the Montana hearing, and you were quite emotional in watching it. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing for a second, like what your thinking was and what you were feeling when you were watching our supporters testify at this hearing in record numbers and in a variety of different.
Yeah.
What was going on for you?
Well, I can tell you, it's tough, like transitioning from watching the Montana hearing over into a Zoom call and not be just wearing my heart on my sleeve. But the Montana hearing, I have to say that yesterday's hearing is unlike any hearing that I think I've ever seen in Montana. I mean, the advocates that came out were just incredible, and we must have had 12 to 14 different clinicians and physicians that came out in support. I'm sorry, that came out in opposition of the bill. I've just never seen anything like it. It was, again, we had bipartisan lawmakers testifying. We had clinicians testifying. We had doctors testifying, terminally ill advocates. It was incredibly moving. And like I said yesterday, Mickey, it was one of the most impactful hearings I've ever seen in Montana.
We outnumbered the opposition like 2-1 in terms of like the number of folks that were representing our position in it, and
Absolutely.
they did an amazing job in countering the arguments of the opposition. I think it's also, when you talk about the number of doctors, Elizabeth, it's often I love that we still get emotional about this because it deserves our emotions, right? Like, so I by no means am I being judgmental about that aspect of it, but also the emotion of the testimony. And to see doctors be emotional about it as well was really incredible. And it's easy for us to get kind of into the legislative fights, and skip over some of the work that happens once we win the legislative fights. And part of the reason why there were so many doctors there was because of the work that CNC and others in Montana have done to try and normalize the practice of medical aid in dying within the Montana infrastructure, medical infrastructure and practice, right? Yeah, and there have been tremendous gains around that. And part of the reason we do that is try to help us when we're defending these laws that come under attack, as well as being able to help show in other states what a real practice can look like, particularly in a state that doesn't necessarily have a specific authorization.
Absolutely.
So kudos to your team, our clinical engagement team, our community team, who all were part of kind of normalizing that practice to hopefully put a bulwark between the practice of great medicine being torn away for the folks of Montana by this legislature. And hopefully they will be able to withstand that. Thanks, Elizabeth, for sharing. I know I put you on the spot.
It's okay. I didn't cry, so we're in a good place. So thank you for that. Thank you. Nicole, I know that we need bipartisan support to make sure that Montana's access to medical aid in dying is protected, like we talked about. So what can advocates continue to do there?
Of course. We know that if you are in Montana, we need you, and we need you right now. We need all Montanians to call and email their senators in Helena and tell them why you support end-of-life options and share your personal story. It holds incredible power. As Mickey and Elizabeth were both talking, testimony was very moving, and it just is a reminder of how much power you hold in your story. Your voice is truly how we get things done.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nicole. So I know also in Illinois that a lot has been taking place. They've been incredibly busy, not just over the last few months, but really kind of laying that groundwork over the last 5 or 6 years as well. Can you share some of the things that the team in Illinois is doing?
Of course, they've been very busy. Every time they give us a legislative update, I'm like, whoa, that's so much. It's amazing. For the past few years, they've been laying the groundwork, like you mentioned, for getting this important option authorized in Illinois. And in January, Assistant Senate Majority Leader Linda Holmes, along with other sponsors, introduced the End of Life Options for Terminally Ill Patients Act, which is a super exciting step forward. They've been working hand in hand with their amazing partners, coalition partners, especially the ACLU, to keep this momentum to advance this effort. In February, we had our first ever Senate Executive Committee hearing, which was a subject matter hearing. This was attended by 70 advocates. That's amazing. After the experts spoke, the chair unexpectedly opened the floor for public testimony, and nearly 15 advocates were ready to go. They pivoted from and stepped forward to speak in support. That is very brave. The vote in this committee is expected very soon. We don't have an answer yet. On March 5th, we held a lobby day so constituents could meet with lawmakers directly, and they will continue to engage in legislative outreach and advocacy training.
That's great. What are some of the things that, looking ahead, what are some of the things that we can expect there?
Great question. I would say everything is possible. A Senate Executive Committee vote is expected in the coming weeks, like I mentioned, so keep an eye out for that information. If the bill passes, the bill moves to the Senate floor, where we believe we have the votes for approval. It must then pass in the House before early May. We're not stopping here. We'll keep pushing forward and keep you in the loop as things move along.
Great. And how can folks help in Illinois?
Folks, we're asking you one more time, please reach out to your lawmakers in Springfield and ask them to vote yes on the bill. And if you've already reached out, do it again. They love hearing from you. The louder you get, the better it is.
That's great, Nicole.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Hey, Fran, I know that our team on the ground there in Massachusetts is working incredibly hard, not just our team, but the coalition as well. So, can you share some of the things that are taking place there or the latest from the Team Massachusetts?
Absolutely. So the Massachusetts team has been working really to build off the momentum that they gained in the 23-24 legislative session. And they're focused right now on adding official bill sponsors to the bill and raising the profile of the bill in the public eye. Companion bills have been filed in both the Senate and the House as of just last week. The bills were officially signed. No, let me say that again, because it's important. Companion bills have been filed in both the Senate and the House. And just last week, the bills were assigned to the Joint Committee on Public Health. That is huge. And we are also still awaiting a hearing date for that hearing as well. And then last week as well, the team installed an art display of 7 photos of Massachusetts advocates that were displayed at the State House. And every office was invited to come view the display. This effort was really led by their bill champions. The pieces that were erected included each advocate's dying wish, really trying to focus on who these human beings were at their core. They were moms, they were dads, they were gardeners, hikers, somebody's children, healthcare professionals, really just everyday people who want the option of medical aid in dying. The team says that the display was very well received based on conversations with legislative offices. They're very proud of that initiative. And as of yesterday, the Compassion Choices Action Network hosted a coalition media legislative briefing mini lobby day at the State House to announce the filing of the bills and to call for action this year to pass the legislation. 4 legislative champions spoke at that press conference, along with a patient and a caregiver. And following the event, a group of advocates delivered informational material to all offices, again, really urging and hammering home that they want to see action on this bill this session. The team shared that the top 2 things you can do include creating a 30-second video about why passing the End of Life Options Act is important to you, and then sharing it with staff here at Compassion Choices Team Massachusetts. You can also take a few minutes to email your senator and your representative, asking them to put their name on the bill as a sponsor, and also to get in the ear of their colleagues and advocate for an early hearing.
And if you haven't had an opportunity, drop into their Facebook page and check out the art display, the Dying Wish art display. It's pretty powerful. So I encourage all of you to drop onto their Facebook page and check it out. So there's been so much incredible activity across the country in our state campaigns, and I'm really excited to see how 2025 plays out. In addition to these campaign highlights that we've given you, which are on states that really have the greatest path to passage this year, we know that not only are the CNC volunteers and supporters and staff but as well as our allied partners have been really engaged in states across the entire country. And folks are working on medical aid and dying and discussing all options at end of life. And like I pointed out earlier, 16 states have already introduced, but we know that there's, and I won't be able to name them all, but we know that there are groups working hard, like in Iowa and Minnesota. We know that Virginia has things going on. New Hampshire is moving. Ohio and Arizona and Texas. We know that there was a bill introduction in Tennessee recently, as well as Florida. And then just yesterday, a team of volunteers in South Carolina met to map out their activities for the National Healthcare Decisions Day. So I just want to say that we see you and we acknowledge what you're doing, and just a huge thank you to all the folks working across the states on these really important activities and helping to move this movement forward. So thank you for the state work. I'd like to move away from the state work a little bit and move over to our nation's capital, where we're joined by Nelson Garcia, who is our federal director. Nelson, what's going on in Washington, D.C.?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. What I want to do is mention 4 particular pieces of legislation that we are following right now in both the House and Senate, one of which people may not think is directly related to medical aid and dying, but it actually does have a potential impact, as I will now explain. So right now we are tracking the budget discussion in Washington, D.C. to ensure that the D.C. Death with Dignity law is preserved, D.C. being one plus the 10 states that have medical aid and dying laws legal in this federal city. The House recently passed a continuing resolution that included a provision that would essentially remove DC's home rule, which could then lead to the overturning of laws such as DC's Death with Dignity law. The Senate passed its version, but it also passed. They also passed a separate bill restoring DC's budget authority. Now, that means that if the House agrees to vote on restoring this authority, DC's Death with Dignity law will be preserved for now. But obviously, if the House failed to agree on the Senate bill, that will have some repercussions down the road that we will need to address as an organization, because it will have an impact on DC's Death with Dignity law. Now, our federal team has been and will continue to work very closely with Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton in opposing any attempts to harm the law, which in previous Congresses contained repeal language, especially in the appropriations process. Now, the federal team is also meeting with key Hill offices to express opposition to what's known as the Bowser Act, which is a cynical attempt to use the mayor's name as a title for this bill. Bowser Act is officially called the Better Oversight to Washington and Safety to Every Resident Act, better known as the Bowser Act. The bill would outright repeal DC home rule. No debate about appropriations. It's just a straight out repeal. And by extension, if the DC home rule is repealed, that would lead to the repeal of DC's Death with Dignity law, because we know the majority is opposed to having medical aid and dying laws here in DC. On the offense, we'll continue to work with Congresswoman Brittany Pettersen, Democrat from Colorado, to reintroduce the Patient Access to End-of-Life Care Act. This is one of our top priority legislation. And this bill would basically exempt current and future medical aid and dying authorized states from the provisions of the Assisted Suicide Funding Restriction Act, or in short, known as ASFRA. We are also working very closely with the offices of Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, and Representative Nanette Balagan, Democrat from California, to reintroduce the Comprehensive Care Act, which promotes advanced care planning through national strategy. So those are 4 issues that we are working on. Again, the Appropriations Bill, the Bowser Act, Compassionate Care Act, and the Patient Access to End-of-Life Care Act. And I'm sure there will be other issues down the road that we will continue to monitor and promote, whether it be telemedicine, palliative, and hospice care funding. So thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Nelson. And just a reminder that the federal team did a pretty extensive workshop just last month. You can grab the link off of our website, but I hope to be able to drop it into our chat shortly. So thank you again, Nelson. And thank you to Nicole and Fran for sharing updates, not only from your own campaigns, but from your colleagues as well. I acknowledge that they're in the field. Many of them are in the field at this moment. So again, thank you to both of you for sharing those updates and the updates of your colleagues. And Mickey, do we have any questions?
We sure do, and I'm actually gonna resort these a little bit because Nelson just went, and the first one is any pending or potential problems from one or several of the branches of the federal government that would override state law. Now, you mentioned DC, not a state, but certainly there have been attempts in the past by the federal government to overdo that. And you spoke about the Assisted Suicide Funding Restriction Act, but is there anything else you want to share around that?
Sure. Just as a recap, back in 1997, I believe the Assisted Suicide Funding Restriction Act was a gut check reaction by Congress against Oregon passing its law. And even though there were no federal programs in place, ASFR basically prevented any federal benefits from going to pay for medical aid in dying back then against Oregon, but really throughout the country. The Pedersen bill is our first attempt to try to not necessarily overthrow the ASFRA law, but to at least reform it by exempting the 10 states, the District of Columbia, and any other future state that may pass a medical aid in dying laws from that provision to allow them to receive federal benefits. There has not been any discussion. There has been no legislation that we are aware of or has been discussed that would basically outlaw medical aid in dying law nationwide at this point in time. But we are wary about that, and we are concerned about that, especially under the current political environment, where the House, the Senate, and the President has gone after DC's home rule, which is a first attempt to nullify a local law on a national level. So we are aware of that, and we are monitoring it, and we will definitely mobilize our grassroots support system to make sure that does not happen.
Thanks, Nelson, very much. And we never know what could be tried with an executive order, but can't really speak to that at the moment. So, but thank you, Nelson, for that. I think Fran mentioned the New York Medical Society, and we have a question. This may be for Jaspreet. Around the states, is it common among the states that the State Medical Society supports medical aid in dying? That State Medical Society support medical aid in dying? And can you give us a brief update on like the AMA's position?
Sure. So the first answer is that there's not a commonality around state medical associations and their position on medical aid in dying. Like many things, each jurisdiction is unique and each association makes their own determination. I can say that medical associations in many of the authorized jurisdictions currently have neutral positions on medical aid in dying, which means that they are basically taking the position that they support providers who do not want to participate in medical aid in dying and also support providers that do. At least currently 10 other medical societies in non-authorized jurisdictions have neutral positions, including New York. With regard to the AMA, they have amended their policy slightly to say that it is ethical for a provider to provide medical aid in dying to qualified patients seeking it. And they haven't officially taken a fully supportive policy, but this change is a significant step forward and demonstrates a move towards acceptance within the medical field. And I'll just say, generally speaking, in the healthcare field, there's growing recognition that patients want, need, and deserve access to medical aid in dying. And I think as more jurisdictions both debate and authorize medical aid in dying, the healthcare community is going to continue coming together. And as providers are sharing their experiences and fine-tuning their collaborative efforts, we can all hope to better serve dying patients and their community.
Great, thank you, Jaspreet. Elizabeth, can you delegate a quick update on New Jersey and Minnesota, or answer it yourself?
In Minnesota, I believe that the language for the bill is still being discussed. So I believe there's still an opportunity for Minnesota to introduce a bill this year. And what was the other state? New Jersey?
New Jersey, yes.
Yeah, New Jersey has an improvement bill. The bill waives the 15-day waiting period between the two oral requests. We don't have a date on a hearing yet, but we've been told by the new bill sponsor that it's likely to happen in May or June.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mary's adding that she's heard that it might be introduced on March 31st in Minnesota, that is.
Oh, okay, great.
We're seeing there. Thank you for that. And thanks to all of the advocates and supporters and volunteers who are in the chat. It's amazing, you know, the work that you're doing with CNC and with other organizations on the ground and across the country to do this work. We know it's not just us out there, and we appreciate you adding in the information that you have to this this community that we have going right now. I do have a question around, I think this must be a clinician. I have had clients concerned if they did aid in dying, then they will not get their life insurance. Any info on that? Do you want me, Jaspreet, you want to deal with that one?
Sure. So the answer is right here in front of me as soon as I find it. Okay. So with the exception of New Mexico and Vermont, each of the laws in authorized jurisdictions explicitly state that the obligations created by wills, contracts, insurance, and annuity policies cannot be affected by a terminally ill person's decision to request or use medical aid in dying. So in other words, people are entitled to their existing benefits regardless of whether they use medical aid in dying. Additionally, on the death certificate, the cause of death is listed as the underlying illness. So sometimes people are concerned about benefits not being given out because there's confusion about medical aid in dying being incorrectly classified as suicide, and it is not suicide. And so since the cause of death is the underlying illness, then access to benefits, including wills, contracts, insurance, and annuity policies, are not negatively affected by a person utilizing medical aid in dying.
Thanks, Jaspreet. Anyone? Stay on the phone there, Jaspreet. Don't go away too far. So one more kind of residency restriction question. I live in Illinois and I have a friend who wants to go to Oregon to access the law there. If I go with her, are there any legal ramifications for me?
So the short answer to that is to consult a lawyer that is familiar with the laws in both Illinois and Oregon. We Compassionate Choices are not in the position of giving legal advice. I will say I'll put in the chat that there is a web page as part of CNC's website on residency restrictions. And on that page, there is information for individuals who live out of state and want to go to a jurisdiction that doesn't have a residency requirement to access medical aid in dying, as well as a fact sheet for providers and loved ones who want to support their dying person's wish and go with them.
Thanks, Jaspreet. While you're there,
Okay.
is there an article on our website? I'm trying to remember. If not, we'll ask the panel their number one thing, because it's sometimes fun to hear what the opposition is saying. We have somebody who's new to the issue who is looking for why legislators would say no to medical aid in dying. Do we have a webpage that says that? Otherwise, I'm also going to ask our panel.
Sure.
What's the number one opposition argument you heard this year so far? Let's start with Elizabeth.
Well, sorry, before Elizabeth answers, can I answer about the resource? There's the policy book, which we can also link, has
That's
responses to commonly raised assertions by the opposition, and it's meant to provide information and clarify or rebut arguments against medical aid in dying. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I just want to say I love the way you put that as a policy person. Commonly, what was it? Assertions of the opposition? That's a great word. Thank you.
Commonly stated assertions.
Commonly stated assertions. So, Elizabeth, what's the most commonly stated assertion you've heard so far this year?
Well, what's interesting, I brought this up to, I think, folks in New Mexico earlier today, and this week twice we heard an argument in reference to lawmakers were afraid that the adult children of terminally ill people wanted to off their parents, and so that was heard that twice this week. We also hear things around, moral and ethics, and definitely religion plays a role for lawmakers. Disability rights groups also come out in opposition as well. The slippery slope argument as well.
Fran, what have you heard? What's been your number one this year that you've been hearing?
Well, I think that the ones that Elizabeth stated have been our number ones this year. So I'll offer something else that maybe is not quite as common, but we have heard it, which is, which is that, well, not everybody suffers with their terminal illness, and thus we shouldn't have this option because some people have very peaceful deaths anyway.
So we're waiting for universal suffering to happen? Is that what's happening? Okay, cool. Nicole, do you have anyone that you want to add? Because I'm going to come to you with the next question after that.
I would say that the one, it's very similar to Fran, is that if they need to be in pain, then let them be in pain. It is just part of their natural process.
Thanks. And Nicole, I want you, while you're there, you and I both live in Florida, right?
We do.
Yeah, Central Florida to be precise. I'm the Villages. Where are you? Orlando or
I'm in Orlando, where my car is constantly yellow for pollen. So I'm sorry if I sound funky to everybody.
You sound great. Don't worry about it.
Awesome.
You want to give us the brief history and quick trajectory of any Florida legislation?
Yeah, so I can talk about what's currently going on right now. So Florida just introduced House Bill 471, End of Life Options. That was introduced on February 7th. And right now, we know that it has just been first read. This is by Representative Casello. And then we have a Senate bill that actually dropped in March 10th. That has also been introduced. It's called End of Life Options by Senator Berman. And so we have those two big updates going on right now. I will say none of this is possible. This is possible without our amazing partners, including Florida Death with Dignity, who has been doing a huge work around this piece. And we are monitoring. We are going to provide technical assistance if needed. And everything that is Florida related is going to be updated on our Compassionate Choices Florida page. So we will see all the updates there. And of course, I cannot talk about our Florida Facebook page. If you are interested, please look into our Facebook page, follow us, let us know, give us a DM, a comment, and we're happy to get in touch with you as well.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate that update on my state. I appreciate it. And we get a number of people asking that question about Florida. Do you know how long the bills have been introduced? I'm trying to think back. I've been doing this work since 2005, and I know that we've had bills at least that far back, maybe even further in Florida. Do you know?
So far that I'm aware of, 2020 is where this really starts. And we have an entire timeline on our Florida webpage. So feel free to go on there and look. But we have been introducing for a couple of years now. I believe this is now the third year since 2021. So it's just we're on a good track. And I really encourage people, reach out to your legislators, reach out to your representatives, to your senators. Even if it's slow movement, it doesn't mean that you should not be voicing your opinion. So please reach out to them.
Right, regardless of where you live, and you can check out the advocacy tool on CNC's website to send that message if you'd like to do that. It'll also help you find out who your legislators are. While we're talking about CNC resources, a couple of others, there's been a number of kind of legal questions or accessing legal or attorneys or folks like that. Two things. One is there is a legal intake form. We have a litigation department, and they often also have referral attorneys and things like that. And this will actually become a bigger part of our work, a referral network later on this spring, and we'll be announcing that shortly. There's also, if you go to the legal advocacy pages of our website, there is a form that you can use to ask questions about legal questions and access to friendly lawyers or lawyers that might be supportive of medical aid and dying in your community. The other aspect I'll say is we are doing one of our 2 regular yearly reports on the courts and the Compassion and Choices docket. And we have some amazing experts. Speaking of Florida, Terry Schiavo's attorney is going to be with us for that legal briefing this time on April the 17th, and we'll get the link in, or you can go to the events page to join us as well. Kathy Samaria, I'm trying to remember the exact last name. I'm struggling with last names today, who was one of the co-authors of the seminal book about medical aid and dying. Will also be a legal book about seminal aid and dying, will be a seminal legal book treatise about medical aid and dying, will join us in that workshop as well. We'll be talking every court level, including the Supreme Court. And that's been dropped in the chat for us. I have a little partial. I feel like it's the little train that can and will make it eventually, which is Nevada. Elizabeth, calling out Nevada. What do we know?
So I think, in Nevada, the session happens every other year. And in Nevada in 2023, legislation was introduced and it passed both chambers, and then it was vetoed by the outgoing governor. We don't currently have movement. The bill has been introduced. We don't currently have movement in Nevada, but we are monitoring it closely, and we are providing technical resources. We have people that are working on outreach and education, and we are in close contact with the bill sponsor.
Elizabeth, if I can just add a little bit to that.
Sure.
When we talk about, there's a few states, I also see them in the chat of different updates for different states. And while we don't have active legislative campaigns in every jurisdiction where there is a bill, it's very, very exciting and very important when legislation is introduced. And when we think of progress as taking multiple steps forward, whether they're big steps or small steps, any step is really important. So I want to shout out Nevada here, that when it was passed through the legislature, it was going to be the first bill that made it through a legislature that didn't have a residency requirement in the bill, and the first bill that allowed APRNs to participate as attending and consulting providers without a physician being in the other role. And it was also important because one of our co-sponsors there was actually, I forgot the term we use, I want to say transition story, but was not sure of his position on medical aid and dying until he learned more and had personal experience, and then became a supporter. So it's a transformation story. Same thing with Rhode Island in terms of having a really incredible bill sponsor come through. And while there's not a lot of movement in Rhode Island, this session there was a hearing there, and our dynamic and incredible bill sponsor spoke up and used our resources to do education and make medical aid and dying part of the public discourse. So even if there's not big headline grabbing things, normalizing the conversation around medical aid and dying, making it part of the public discourse are really, really important steps into making the movement move forward. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering, Kathy is actually on the line. Kathy, can you give us the name of your book? I'm so sorry. I just don't have it in front of me.
No problem. Can you hear me, Nikki?
Yeah, we can. Thanks for joining us today.
Great. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear of all this great work going on. I especially appreciated the Florida updates because, as you know, I'm in this state too. And the name of the book is The Right to Die, The Law of End-of-Life Decision Making. Thank you for the shout out.
Thank you for being there. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
Cool. We'll see you next month. Don't forget to sign up to join us. She's really
See you next time.
Thanks. Bye. Okay, so I think I covered all the questions, or pretty close. And if not, we will make sure that we will we'll get to those either in the Q&A box and get back to you. And I will say for John in California, just FYI, right now, Senator Blake Spear, Elizabeth, can you explain California?
Let me defer to Jaspreet on California.
Okay, Jaspreet, do you want to give a sentence? We only have like 30 seconds.
Sure. So in California, we are on the ground. The legislature has changed. There are a number of new lawmakers who are not familiar with medical aid in dying. And so we've been doing education efforts on the ground. We are in conversation with Senator Blake Spear about what changes to the California law Compassionate Choices can get behind 100%. We're hopeful that those conversations will lead to a change bill that Compassionate Choices can get 100% behind. And we will continue to keep everybody informed about what's going there, but know that we are committed to protecting and expanding access to medical aid in dying in California and all across the country.
Great, thanks very much, Jaspreet. So there are a couple of other questions. We'll try to get to those in the Q&A box, or if you want to stick around, we will go to those. In the meantime, thanks to our panelists very much, and the work that you both are doing with all of these amazing people and supporters across the country, as well as thank you for representing your colleagues who are busy on the floor of many of these state houses right now trying to achieve these bills. So we super appreciate you all taking the time out to be with us and share with this amazing community of supporters and donors and volunteers and organizational leaders and experts in our field, etc. Thanks so much. And just as a reminder to everybody, Compassionate Choices work is generously funded through individual supporters. All of our funding basically comes from individual supporters and family foundations. We super appreciate your contributions to Compassionate Choices, which can be done at the website /donate. If you're not already a member or giving to the Compassionate Choices Action Network, please go to that website and become a member and/or make a contribution. A lot of what you heard about today is actually funded by the Compassionate Choices Action Network, and we are two different organizations that are connected in our mission and our vision in achieving the expanded options that we're looking for in medical aid in dying. A portion of this webinar today was funded by Compassionate Choices Action Network, as a disclaimer for that. In the meantime, we look forward to seeing you later next week for our session on being a proxy. Everything you need to know about being a proxy, and are you ready to be a proxy for your person? So if you want to bring your proxy along, or if you're a proxy for someone, get registered for that on March the 25th. And then if it please the court, I couldn't have done a better advertisement than having Kathy literally on here, but Kevin Diaz, who's our interim CEO and director, chief of our legal advocacy program and general counsel will be there, as well as some really top-notch folks. Read more about it and sign up at compassionatechoices.org/events. Thank you all for all you do for advancing our mission and vision, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
Thank you all.